My dad works in B2B marketing, but I never really knew what that meant. Then one day my dad came by my school for career day and told everyone in my class he was a big ROAS man. Then he just kept saying things like, the bigger the ROAS, the better, over and over. My friends still laugh at me to this day. I think it means calculating a return on ad spend. One thing's for sure, I'll be known as the ROAS man's kid for the rest of my days. Why couldn't you just be a fireman or a lawyer? Why? You ruined my life, Dad.
Not everyone gets B2B, but LinkedIn has the people who do. And with ads on LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people based on job title, industry, likelihood to buy, and more. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Coming up on this episode of the Entrepreneurial You.
So a lot of times people think that scale means growing fast or growing bigger, when in reality, that's not the case. Scale is simply just about multiplication and duplication. So entrepreneurs' biggest mistake that I see is, number one, they aren't thinking like business owners and somebody who's building like an actual asset.
Hey, it's John Lee Dumas of EO Fire, and it's the Entrepreneurial You, the show for dedicated and passionate Caribbean entrepreneurs seeking daily inspiration, brought to you by author, speaker, and award-winning entrepreneur Heneka Watkis-Porter. You must be prepared to ignite.
It is another interesting and inspiring episode of the Entrepreneurial You podcast. And of course, I'm your host, Heneka Watkis-Porter. Today we have an incredible guest with us to join the alumni, which includes Seth Godin, Lisa Nichols, Les Brown, John Lee Dumas, Paul Martinelli, Aimee Porterfield, etc., etc. But before we go on, let's give some love to our sponsors, the Jamaica Stock Exchange, big them up, Next Step Digital Services, and 5 Minute Bookkeeper. I also want to share about Podcast Power. That's my book. My book on podcasting, Podcast Power, the quick start guide to launching and leveling up your brand. This step-by-step guide teaches, among other things, why you need to start a podcast now, how to start a podcast, finding guests for your podcast, making money from your podcast and leveraging your podcast to build your brand, how to conduct podcast interviews like a pro, etc., etc. So you can get it at henekawatkisporter.com or on Amazon. Yes, go right there and get it. So for today's guest reveal, he's a multi-million-dollar revenue generator, best-selling author, Inc. 5000 CEO, and a Rapid Business Growth Strategist. He has an innate talent for creating simple systems that make companies more profitable, scalable, and sustainable. And that's what we want, right? Profitability, scalability, and sustainability. So from a high school dropout to multi-million-dollar strategist, his story is the epitome of start from the bottom, now we're here. Started from the bottom, now we're here. Let's make Marquel Russell welcome. Welcome, Marquel.
Thank you so much, Heneka. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, absolutely. So happy to have you. Let's hear this icebreaker question for you. So, Marquel, if you could have any superpower to help you in your business growth strategies, what would it be?
My superpower would be to be able to touch a book and easily be able to consume and retain all of the insights in an implementable way, just by touching the book.
Oh Lord, me don't want that too. I would want that too. All right, so let me just tell my friends here listening to us that this segment of Success Exposed is brought to you by 5 Minute Bookkeeper, and you'll hear a little more about them along the way. But let's continue with Marquel. Marquel, so you have this journey from being a high school dropout to know you're a business growth strategist, right? That's really an inspiring feat to achieve. Now, it sounds like it's a linear path, but I know better that it cannot be linear. So let's talk about that journey, right? You dropped out of high school, and now you are advising people about growing businesses. What could I go so?
Yeah. So it's everything but linear, right? Especially with my path. So I dropped, like you said, I dropped out of high school in 10th grade. I always been entrepreneurial. So my first business. So while I started off like cutting grass in the neighborhood, or before we moved to neighborhoods that had lawns, I was knocking on your door, asking, "Can I take your trash out?" Then I was cutting lawns when we got to lawns. Then I got into school. Everybody who I knew who was making money sold drugs, right? So I end up going down that path. So I always tell people my first business was in the pharmaceutical industry, right? So yeah. So I started that path. And then fast forward, I got introduced to network marketing, where you can recruit people and build, you recruit people and, you get paid off for what they do and so forth. And that ended up introducing me to online marketing. And when I learned online marketing, how to generate leads, because I was trying to grow my network marketing business, I saw that other people wanted to learn what I was doing. So I started teaching it. And then I realized coaching was a business model. And then we started a company called Client Attraction University. And then we obviously went through all the peaks and valleys of growing the company. We actually grew that company, become an Inc. 5000 fastest growing company in the world, or in the country. And from there, we discovered that while we helped thousands of businesses attract more clients to grow their business, one of the biggest things that we found that businesses was missing once we helped them grow their revenue is like infrastructure and systems and processes. So even though we were helping them get more clients, they still couldn't strategically scale because they didn't have the right infrastructure to deal with more of this inflow of revenue that they wanted. So that's from there we started a company called the Strategic Scale Institute, whereas now it's focused solely on helping businesses build companies that are more profitable, more scalable, more sustainable, like you said, more enjoyable and sellable if you decide to sell your business at some point. So that's what we're all about now. And again, it's built around 8 pillars. So we always are taking businesses through that path to scale. And of course, like you said earlier, that path to scale isn't linear. It's a lot of different things and ebbs and flows and peaks and valleys that go along through that process.
All right, so tell us a little bit about some of those values, right? The peak we can almost sell, right? Multi-million-dollar revenue generator. That's the peak right now. But take us through some of those values.
Yeah, so I think one of the values was, at first my income goal was $10,000 a month. That was my game-changing income goal. 10,000 a month changed my life, right? Got to 10,000 a month, and then I wanted to go from 10,000 to 20,000 a month, and it actually just caused more working hours. I literally, when I first came into this online world, I actually, to start learning this business stuff, and I was transitioning from my previous life to this life, I literally went broke trying to figure all this stuff out. So I was buying courses, listening to all the trainings, going to conferences, because I was obsessed with like learning this stuff, and literally went broke. I went through all my savings that I had saved up. And my girlfriend at the time, who's now my beautiful, amazing wife, she actually was paying all the bills, and she was putting gas in the tank and, doing all the things. When she was a bartender, and she was even giving me like what I call an allowance from her bartender tips. And I was using that to invest into courses and trainings and coaching to learn this stuff. So I literally like went through this crazy deep, deep, deep valley of like no money, no revenue. And of course that can hit your identity as well, especially when you come from making money. As I went through this like transition to really climb this next mountain to building this company in this entirely new world that I knew nothing about. So I think that was one of the biggest ones along the path. And then of course, once I got it to the point that I can get it to myself, right? Then I always tell business owners, you don't go from mountaintop to mountaintop. You get to one mountaintop, and to get to that other mountaintop, you literally got to climb down a mountain, so to speak, go through another valley, and then reclimb this mountain again. So I went from this mountaintop of as far as I can get the business on my own. And then I had to get into like building team and hiring people and building systems for people, and which was a whole nother skill set, because I learned how to make money, but not necessarily how to manage people, how to hire people, how to, all those different things that come through. So that was a whole nother valley we had to go through and then learn that skill set. And then typically when you get to another peak, if you want to continue to grow, now it's like, all right, for me to get to that other peak, now I got to go through this other valley, which may be developing a leadership team, because you go from hiring people and you're leading everybody to now developing a leadership team to help lead this big team that you develop. And of course, a lot of times people don't teach this type of stuff So now I'm like out trying to figure out all this stuff on my own. So now you go through this plateau phase when it comes to revenue, because now you're having to go from generating revenue to like building out systems to actually sustain this revenue that you're creating. So it's a whole like, and then you're growing personally, and then your identity is being questioned in some areas because then your identity is tied to business growth. So now you're trying to figure out how do you navigate all that while still being a dad, while still being a husband, while still doing all the other things in the everyday life. So it's a journey for sure.
Yeah, and it sounds like at some point, some mountain, some peak becomes the valley for something else.
Yeah.
Wow, interesting concept. All right, so let's talk a little, Marquel, on entrepreneurs are listening, and they have this little brick and mortar thing that they're running, and they want to scale that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about at what point do you think, or should you think about scaling your business, and how to do it effectively so that there's some business that scale too quickly and they crumble just as quickly.
Yeah.
How do we navigate that?
So great question. So basically, a lot of times people think that, so scale is like this buzzword that's been thrown around a lot these days, right? So a lot of times people think that scale means growing fast or growing bigger, when in reality, that's not the case. Scale is simply just about multiplication and duplication, right? So that's what scale is. Scale doesn't mean having a big team. So some people may think, well, I got 30, 40, 50 person team, 100 person, I'm scaling. That doesn't necessarily mean that, because as you're adding all these new heads, that could actually be affecting your profitability. It could be affecting a lot of different things. You can actually scale with a smaller team where you can have 2 or 3 people on your team and actually be scaling, because at the end of the day, it's just profit. It's about multiplication and duplication. So to answer your question, when do you start scaling? I think when you start scaling, you want to be at a place where you got some proof of concept, right? So meaning you're generating revenue, you're working with clients, not like you don't get your first client and now you're like, okay, how do I duplicate? It's like, no, let's say you get your first 10 clients, your first 20 clients. And from a revenue standpoint, depending on your business model, let's say you're a service-based business. Let's say you're $30,000, $40,000 per month. And at that point, now you got some solid proof of concept, because now you're around $250,000, $300,000 per year. So now you're like, okay, you got some reasonable proof of concept there. So now you're like, okay, how do I begin to duplicate myself, right? So based on everything that you as the business owner do right now in the day-to-day, how can you now create systems where you can multiply yourself? So let's just say, for example, let's say you do all the sales calls at this point. You may say, all right, how do I begin to hire another salesperson? So now it's 2 of us doing sales calls. You're doing some of the calls, they're doing some of the calls, and then you gradually back yourself out of doing sales calls altogether if you desire to. You may say, no, I want to keep sales calls, but I want to have another person doing it. So now both of us can be doing double the revenue, right? Or you may say, I just want to get to the point where I replace myself on the calls and then have somebody else doing the calls, for example. So that's one way you make, okay, how can I multiply myself there? Let's say you build websites, right? So let's say somebody pays you $15,000. You have a website, a design agency. You build all the websites yourself. Multiplication may look like you hiring somebody else to focus on building the websites, and you pay them a percentage, and now you focus on sales. So your main priority is focusing on sales to bring in new clients, to build websites for, and now you have somebody else who's building the website. So if you used to invest 10 hours per week building websites, now you just saved yourself 10 hours. Now you can focus those 10 hours on calls, for example, or creating systems or whatever that may look like. Let's just say it's just calls. Now there's 10 more calls you can take per week, 40 more calls you can take per month. And if you close in 20% of those, that's 8 new clients that you're able to bring on because you weren't building websites. And that's just with one new person on your team. So that's one way to think about, once you got this proof of concept, how do I now begin to multiply and duplicate?
we're talking about scaling, and even if we're talking about scaling, I have to talk about 5-Minute Bookkeeper here, our partners at the Entrepreneurial You. So 5-Minute Bookkeeper is for the entrepreneur who struggles with complex bookkeeping platforms that were not created for them, but for accounting professionals. They pay these monthly subscriptions, but don't really have the time or inclination to learn how to use a tool. That's why you need to visit 5minutebookkeeper.com. That's the numeral 5minutebookkeeper.com. Thank you so much for sharing with us, 5-Minute Bookkeeper, for being our partner. Let's continue with our guest, Marquel Russell. Now, one of the things that I know without a doubt is necessary for scaling a business is the requisite system in place. Talk about systemizing your business, because sometimes we hear systemizing and we're thinking, oh my gosh, it has to be this huge, highfalutin process that we go through. But is that really the case? And when we're talking about systemizing business, what kind of systems are you talking about? What are you talking about?
Yeah, so great question. So basically, I look at it as different engines. So if you think about like a 747 jet, it has 4 different engines. So I look at the business as the same way. So big picture, if you look at a business with 4 engines, you got a marketing engine, you got a sales engine, you got an operations engine, and typically like a client services engine, and maybe finance. Finance may be under operations. So a 747 jet can run if it loses an engine, but it's not going to run optimally. So as a business, you want to have these optimal systems. So I'll give you an example. So I was sitting down with a client the other day, and one of the systems we laid out for her was her fulfillment system, because she got her business to about $300,000 or $400,000 a year, but she wants to get to 5 million. So it was like, okay, how do we can't do that at the same rate you're doing it right now. So one of the things we laid out was like her fulfillment, her delivery system. So when she brings on a new client, and they write grants. So when she brings on a new client, we walk through exactly what her process looks like right now. And every part of that process, she was doing everything. She was having the sales call. She was having the onboarding call. She was having the Zoom calls with like to implement everything. She was writing the grant. She was literally doing everything, and it was exhausting her because she's doing $300,000-$400,000 a year, and she's handling everything on her own. So I was like, all right, let's walk through exactly what does this when I pay you, what happens next? And she walked me through that. That's okay. What happens? What happens? What happens? So we literally just diagrammed everything that she currently does and every part of that process. And then we looked at it and said, okay, what processes can we put in place to eliminate you from here? So for example, you manually send this update out based on these grants this way. All right, what software or what tool can we use to have that automated? So now they still get this notification without you technically have to do it, right? So we're either looking at a process or a person. So what process can we put in place to have this go out and remove you from it? Or what person can we put in place to step in? So we looked at, here's a process, here's a tool that we can use to automate this, and it runs without you. So that's number one. And then we also looked at, okay, here's a person that can not only do these particular calls, but here's another person that can actually take over these grants and the writing of these grants. So now we've removed her from the complete fulfillment process. And now in this particular season, she can solely focus on sales for her $50,000 service. And now she's removed from all the deliverables instead of maybe one touch point. And then, of course, leading those individuals who are in the process.
Excellent. So when we're thinking about entrepreneurs, what are some of the biggest pitfalls that you've seen entrepreneurs make in determining or trying to get to the next level, scaling their business?
I think one of the common things that I see is that entrepreneurs, we're trying to do everything, right? Entrepreneurs typically most of them aren't really operational and systems thinkers, right? So it's like entrepreneurs are typically really good at doing the thing, right? Making money. So for example, we typically see people, I know in my community here in Atlanta, we typically hear people say, oh man, you can cook really good. You should start a restaurant. Well, that's actually the worst reason to start a business, just because you're good at something, right? Because it's like, just because you can cook good and you sell plates on Sunday doesn't mean that you can get a brick and mortar spot. You can hire people. You can do you can systemize your process. It's not the same thing, right? So we gotta understand that all entrepreneurs being an entrepreneur and a business owner is 2 completely different things. And being an entrepreneur and a CEO is 2 completely different things. So an entrepreneur's biggest mistake that I see is number one, they aren't thinking like business owners and somebody who's building like an actual asset. And I think another thing is the finance piece. I mean, your partner that you mentioned earlier, from an advertising standpoint, like from one of your partners, a lot of times business owners aren't thinking about, okay, yeah, this is top line revenue, but they're not thinking about, okay, how much of that top line revenue is profit and how much positive cash flow do we have as it relates to that top line revenue. And we're just focusing on sales and generating top line revenue and not looking at like the real picture. So I would say those are the two things right out the gate.
Awesome. At this point, I'm going to be sharing the community connection segment, also brought to you by 5-Minute Bookkeeper. And this segment, as you know, my friends listening, that it is where I invite you to share your reviews, your questions, your feedback, your comments, just to engage with us so that I know that I'm not talking to myself here, or when I have my guests, which is every week, talking to my guests, we're just talking alone, right? I want to know that you're engaging with us. So today's feedback is in the form of a review of Podcast Power, the book I mentioned earlier, Quick Start Guide to Launching and Leveling Up Your Brand. And it comes from Aimee J. She's out of the United States and she reviewed Podcast Power. She says that Heneka does a great job of taking a large topic such as podcasting and presenting it in an easy to process manner. She showcases not only her knowledge of podcasting, but also provides actionable steps to help a beginner get started. Heneka lays the groundwork for why you should start a podcast so well that it's hard to find a reason to not. If you're interested in podcasting, this is a wonderful resource to help get you to press record and launch quickly. I am so grateful to you, Aimee J, for leaving that review titled provides the framework, Podcast Power provides the framework you need to launch your podcast. So big up yourself, big up yourself. All right, so let's get back to my friend here, Marquel Russell. All right, we've been talking about, the whole scaling your business and, focusing on that aspect of it. Pretty much a blueprint, as it were, for rapid business growth. That's what we've been talking about. I'm going to ask you at this point to just bring it home to that entrepreneur who is listening, maybe a digital nomad, maybe an even solopreneur, right? Listening now, I'm like, how do I scale this little thing that I'm doing on my own? Right now, I feel like you're throwing shots at me because I feel like I want to do everything myself and I feel like I can only do everything myself. Talk to that entrepreneur on their laptop, listening to this episode of the Entrepreneurial You podcast.
So my biggest advice would be to ask yourself, like, am I growing something that I really want to scale, right? You may not. You may want to just have an individual. So I have a buddy of mine. They do $2 million a year. I think about probably take home $1 million and some change of that. It's him, a buddy of his, and they have an assistant. They have no desire to scale beyond that. They're totally cool with that, right? So I think it boils down to, like, do you want to scale? Like, do you enjoy just you being the person, you doing the thing, you doing the marketing, you doing the sales, working with a handful of clients or whatever? I think that's the biggest question to ask yourself. You don't feel triggered or feel challenged to grow any bigger if you don't have that desire. Like if you have a lawn service and you're like, hey, I enjoy cutting grass. Like, I want to be the person that's cutting the grass. I want to be the person that's having the conversation, getting the clients, and I want to do that. Like, that's totally cool if that's your vision. But I think the biggest thing is just to get clear on, like, what is your vision and what's the level of impact you're going to require. And if you're going to require other systems or other people, or if you're like, no, I'm actually good at making just enough to do XYZ and I don't want to, go any bigger. And either way, it's totally cool. But I think that's the biggest advice is, like, get clear on, like, what that is for you.
Right, to get clarity, because of course clarity precedes focus, right? Once you get clear, then you're able to focus, all over the place and are being attracted and distracted by bright, shiny objects. How might persons get in touch with you? How might our listeners get in touch with you, Marquel, beyond this conversation that we're having?
So I would say whatever your favorite social media platform is just Marquel, Marquel Russell. So LinkedIn. If you're on Instagram, connect with me on Instagram, Marquel Russell, Marquel Russell. Shoot me a DM, let me know you saw me on here, and let's connect. Also, if you go to scalemadeeasy.com, madeeasy.com. And we got a ton of free resources for you over there, whether that's marketing, whether that's sales, whether that's creating systems, everything you require. You got a ton of free resources that you can actually go dive into, whether you want to hit your neck, you want to go from 1 million to 10 million, or if you're at 200,000 to 300,000 a year and you're ready to get to 1 million to 2 million to 3 million, all the resources will be there to actually assist you with doing that.
All right. Sounds good. Sounds good. I love the sound of that, and I'm sure they do too. Thank you so much, Marquel, for sharing your insights with us today. Very much appreciated.
Thank you for having me.
So it's now time for Trending Now, brought to you by Heneka, Watkis-Porter.com and 5minutebookkeeper.com, right? 5-Minute Bookkeeper. So one of the hottest trends in marketing right now is the rise of short form video content. Of course, we know platforms like TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts are popular and driving significant engagement and business results. According to a recent report by HubSpot, 90% of marketers using short form video will increase or maintain their investment in 2024, as these videos have the highest ROI of any social media marketing strategy. Additionally, and that's on Coursera, according to Coursera. Additionally, short form videos are highly engaging with a completion rate of around 68%. This shift towards bite-sized content offers businesses a powerful way to connect with their audiences quickly and effectively. And that's what's trending now. And I'm sure you know that. Thank you. All right. Again, I want to extend gratitude. Gratitude is a must, as Kofi says in Jamaica. Marquel, thanks again for sharing your insights with us. We are grateful. Of course, we love his story from high school dropout to $1 million strategist and multimillion-dollar strategist and Inc. 5000 company and all of that stuff. So big up yourself. Big up yourself, as we say in Jamaica.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And my friends, you know what to do, right? So if you enjoy the show, if you did enjoy it, you know what to do. Subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, leaving a rating and share it with your friends. Sharing is, in fact, caring. And I invite you to visit my website, HenekaWatkis-Porter.com, to get your free ebook on conducting podcast interviews like a pro. So if you too, in addition to that, if you're an aspiring podcaster or a busy entrepreneur, you just want to start your own show, but you guess what? You just think that it's just, oh my gosh, you're just too much work. I can't bother to do the production, look for guests, all of that. Just listen to me talking about it. You probably sound a little exhausted, right? And it can be exhausting if it's not the thing that you want to do. You only want to show up and just record. Well, reach out to the Entrepreneurial You media at HenekaWatkis-Porter.com, and we will make it happen for you. All right. Let's hear a word from the Jamaica Stock Exchange, or a long-standing partner here on the Entrepreneurial You podcast.
We needed to raise capital, but our experience with local financial institutions was that they were cautious and slow to act, and interest rates were far too high. We had real concerns about financing our business through outside equity investors and the possibility of interference. Could we get a fair valuation for our business? We had our own ideas about the business and its value. Should I go the traditional route of bank financing, or should I try the Jamaica Stock Exchange? So we made a call and experienced transformation of our business through conversations. I'm John Mafood, CEO of Jamaican Teas, and we're listed on the Jamaica Stock Exchange.
Give us a call today at 876-967-3271 to begin your transformation through conversation. We want to see your company listed on the Jamaica Stock Exchange.
Finally, I invite you to affirm with me. I am a beacon of innovation and success, radiating my unique vision into the world. Stay inspired, stay driven, and until next time, keep shining brightly. Do take care.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.